When I first met Sarah, I thought I'd met the calm after my storm. I was 29, old enough to know what I wanted, and tired of meaningless flings. She was 28, graceful, soft-spoken, and carried herself with a kind of shy intelligence that immediately drew me in. Her laugh was small but genuine, and every time she smiled, it felt like a quiet promise of peace. I had been in relationships before, ones filled with drama and chaos, but with Sarah, everything felt still, like I had finally found a place to rest. Our relationship started simply. We met through mutual friends at a friend's birthday dinner, and I remember she was wearing a pale blue dress that matched her eyes. She wasn't loud or attention-seeking. In fact, she spoke so softly that I had to lean in to hear her. But when she spoke, every word mattered. I was hooked instantly. The first few months were blissful. We'd go on long drives, cook simple meals together, and spend weekends exploring small towns around us. I thought I was falling in love with her because she made life seem gentle again. There were a few odd moments, though. She was affectionate, but never overly physical. When we first got intimate, I noticed she was a little hesitant, almost guarded. She told me she didn't have much experience, and I respected that. I didn't push. I wanted her to feel safe. I assumed that with time, things would open up. What I didn't realize then was that I was mistaking her. Emotional distance for modesty. A few months into dating, I brought up the idea of being exclusive. We'd been seeing each other regularly, spending almost every night together, and it just felt right. But when I mentioned it, I remember her expression shifting, like she'd been caught off guard. She hesitated, then admitted that she had still been seeing someone else casually. My heart sank. I thought we were already exclusive, even if we hadn't labeled it. She cried that night, begged me not to leave, said it had meant nothing, and that she just hadn't been sure I was serious. I was hurt but in love, so I forgave her. She promised to cut him off, and I believed her. Looking back, that was the first crack, the first quiet betrayal that I brushed aside because I wanted to, believe she was the person I hoped she was. A year later, we got married. It was small and intimate, just family and close friends. She looked stunning in her lace dress, her hands trembling slightly as she held mine at the altar. I remember thinking, this is it. This is my forever. For the first few years, life was good. We bought a house, built a life, had 2 beautiful children. Sarah was a wonderful mother, patient, nurturing, the kind of mom who always had homemade cookies, waiting when the kids got home from school. Our intimacy, however, never changed much. She was gentle but reserved. I was the one to initiate almost every time, and she rarely took the lead. I told myself it didn't matter. Sex wasn't everything, right? I had a loving wife, a happy family, and a stable home. Still, sometimes late at night, when I'd lie beside her after she'd fallen asleep, I'd wonder why it always felt like she was somewhere else in her mind. Over the years, I convinced myself this was just who she was, someone not deeply in touch with that side of herself. She said she didn't enjoy experimenting or trying new things, and I respected that. She told me she didn't like oral, didn't like dirty talk, didn't like roughness or dominance. She preferred tenderness, and so I gave her tenderness. I learned to suppress the parts of me that wanted more excitement, more passion, because I thought love was about compromise. The years rolled by quietly. We went to work, raised the kids, hosted family dinners, took vacations to the same quiet beaches every summer. We had our routines, our comfort zones. To anyone looking from the outside, we were the perfect couple. Steady, reliable, loving. I took pride in that image. I genuinely believed we were happy. Then something started changing. It was subtle at first. Sarah seemed distant, distracted. She'd stare at her phone more often, smile at texts, and when I'd ask who it was, she'd just say, work stuff. I didn't think much of it. Her job had been stressful lately. She'd recently taken on a new project, and it was demanding. But sometimes I'd catch her zoning out, lost in thought almost. Nostalgic. When I'd ask what was wrong, she'd shake her head and smile weakly. Just tired, she'd say. Around that same time, our sex life got even colder. Weeks would pass before we were intimate, and when we were, it felt mechanical, as if she were fulfilling an obligation rather than sharing something real. I tried talking to her about it. I told her I felt like something was missing between us, that maybe we needed to reconnect. She agreed, and for a while, things seemed to improve. We started talking more about what she liked, What made her feel good? Her fantasies. At first, she was shy and resistant, but slowly she started opening up. I couldn't speak. My mind went blank, a storm of confusion and disbelief swirling behind my silence. 5 years? That's what she said next. 5 years into our marriage, she'd been with him. All through the time we were dating. All through the time we were building our foundation. I remember sitting up, swinging my legs off the bed, staring at the floor as if I could find answers there. My voice cracked when I finally managed to say, "Who was he?" She hesitated, then whispered, "The same man I told you about back then." I stood up, my body trembling, my breath shallow. The man she had stopped seeing before we got married. The one she said meant nothing. He'd been in her life the whole time, in secret, while I was busy building a life with her. Sarah began to explain, words spilling out like a confession she'd rehearsed 100 times. She said he had been dominant, that he had toyed with her body and mind, claimed he had some kind of control over her, that she tried to stop but couldn't resist him. She described how he'd reach out and she'd always go back. She said she felt trapped, manipulated, guilty, but never strong enough to walk away. I stood there listening, my heart splitting in slow motion. Every word she said twisted deeper. The woman I thought was pure, loyal, and shy had been living a double life. She told me the affair only ended because he died. Cancer, she said, as if fate had intervened to set her free. I couldn't even look at her. My hands shook as I tried to process it all. I'd spent over a decade with this woman, raised children with her, shared dreams, tears, laughter, and the entire time, she'd carried this secret. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room until dawn, staring at the blank TV screen, trying to understand how someone you love so deeply could be so unrecognizable. I thought about every time she'd kissed me, every time she'd looked me in the eye and said, "I love you." Now, I couldn't tell if any of it had ever been real for the next few days. The world felt like static. Nothing made sense. I'd wake up, see her lying beside me, and feel an overwhelming mix of anger, grief, and disbelief. Every memory we had together now felt poisoned. The house that once felt warm now echoed with lies. Sarah tried to talk, but every word she said felt hollow. She kept insisting that she had to come clean, that she wanted a real marriage built on honesty. But I couldn't process it. It wasn't honesty, it was an autopsy. She wasn't confessing to heal us. She was digging up the corpse of our relationship and forcing me to stare at its decay. I tried to go to work, but my mind wasn't there. Every moment I'd see flashes of her, her lips, her eyes, her voice, but twisted. I'd picture her in another man's bed, whispering the same things she whispered to me. My stomach churned with disgust and something I didn't want to admit. Arousal. I started drinking more, not to numb the pain, but to quiet the obsession, because that's what it had become. I wasn't just hurt. I was obsessed with the betrayal. I wanted to understand it, dissect it, own it. At one point, I did something I'm not proud of. I went through her old social media, digging through every photo, every post from that time. I was looking for him, his face, a clue, anything. I found him eventually. He wasn't what I expected. He wasn't handsome or successful. He looked ordinary, like the kind of guy you'd pass on the street without noticing. But something in his eyes. There was arrogance there, a kind of quiet confidence that made my skin crawl. Then I found a photo from years ago, Sarah smiling at a party, standing just a few feet away from him. I zoomed in on her face, and there it was, that smile. The same one she gave me on our wedding day. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. I slammed the laptop shut and just sat there, staring into the dark. I realized that for 12 years, I'd been living beside a stranger. A few days later, Marcus convinced me to talk to someone. "Man, you're spiraling," he said. "You need to process this before it eats you alive." I didn't go to therapy. Instead, I joined a few online forums. I started reading stories from people who'd been cheated on, stories of betrayal, rage, revenge, and sometimes forgiveness. It was strangely comforting, knowing I wasn't the only one drowning in this kind of pain. One night, I stumbled onto a subreddit where people shared stories about infidelity, raw, honest confessions from both cheaters and the cheated. I read for hours, scrolling through other people's heartbreaks. Some stories mirrored mine so closely that I felt sick. On impulse, I made a post. I didn't include names or details, Just my story, my confusion, my emotions. I wrote about how Sarah's confession shattered me, but also how parts of it weirdly turned me on. I wrote about how I hated myself for it, how I didn't understand why my body reacted when my mind screamed in disgust. The responses came quickly. Some people sympathized, others criticized, but a few understood. They talked about how trauma can mix pain with arousal, how sometimes the mind and body can't separate violation from desire. It made sense in a twisted way. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about the way. Sarah described him, how dominant he was, how he took control. That word, control, echoed in my mind. I realized I'd never really had control in our marriage. I'd been the provider, the caretaker, the emotional anchor, but never the one who truly held power. That realization broke something inside me, or maybe it freed me, because for the first time in my life, I stopped seeing myself as the victim. I started seeing myself as the man who could take control back. When I finally returned home, Sarah looked like she hadn't slept in days. She tried to hug me, but I stepped back. I told her I wasn't ready to forgive, and maybe I never would. I told her I needed honesty from now on, every detail, every truth, no matter how painful. She agreed instantly, desperate to make things right. So she told me more. Every detail I hadn't asked for. Every touch, every moment. Every time she lied to my face and said she loved me after sleeping with him. It was torture, but I didn't stop her. I wanted to hear it all. I wanted to own every piece of the truth she had hidden from me. As she spoke, I watched her body language. How she flinched when I stayed silent. How her voice cracked when she admitted the parts that made her feel shame. For the first time, I wasn't the weak one. She was. That night, I slept in our bed again, not because I forgave her, but because I wanted her to feel my presence, to remind her that I was still there, still watching, still deciding what came next. For the first time since her confession, I felt calm. Not happy, not healed, just calm. Because deep down, I knew this story wasn't over yet. I wasn't done with her. Not by a long shot. The calm I felt wasn't peace. It was a silence before the storm, the kind that hides thunder in its chest. Every smile, every kind word Sarah offered after that night only deepened the cracks in my patience. She thought confession had cleared her conscience. She thought crying in my arms would bring back the man she broke. But she didn't realize. She wasn't living with the same man anymore. I watched her carefully. She'd try to cook my favorite meals, linger near me, touch my arm softly like she used to. I didn't flinch anymore. I let her believe we were rebuilding. I even played along, asked her about work, watched movies beside her, even laughed once or twice. But every gesture was measured. Every word was bait. I wanted her to feel what I had felt, that quiet paranoia, that gnawing uncertainty about what was real and what wasn't. So I started small. I became emotionally unpredictable. Some days I'd be gentle, other days distant and cold. I'd compliment her in the morning and ignore her by night. When she'd ask if something was wrong, I'd smile and say, "Everything's fine." That was the first lie, and it felt good. Meanwhile, I had started documenting everything. Her texts, her moods, her work schedule. I wasn't just her husband anymore. I was her shadow. I knew when she left early for work, when she lingered on her phone too long. I wasn't looking for another affair. I was studying her guilt, how she carried it, because guilt leaves a trail deeper than any secret. 3 months passed like this. She started to crumble. She cried more often, apologized even when I hadn't accused her of anything. She'd wake up in the middle of the night and whisper, "Please don't leave me." I'd pretend to be asleep. One evening, she came home early from work and found me sitting at the dining table with my laptop open. On the screen were emails, hers, old ones, messages she'd sent to him. I had dug deep into her old backups, retrieved what she probably thought was gone forever. Her breath hitched when she saw them. She tried to reach for the laptop, but I pulled it away. "You deleted them," I said quietly. "But the internet doesn't forget." Tears welled in her eyes. "Please, I can't see that again," she said. "Then don't," I replied. But I did. Every word. For the first time. She looked genuinely terrified. Not because I'd found the proof, but because I'd read it. Every filthy, passionate, secret detail. She knew what that meant. She knew I'd seen her true self. Not the version she sold to the world, but the one she hid from everyone, even me. I stood up, closed the laptop, and said, "You don't get to erase your sins by confessing them. You live with them now." Every day. That night, she slept in the guest room, sobbing quietly. I didn't comfort her. A week later, I started putting my plan into motion. I reached out to a divorce lawyer, not to file yet, just to learn. I wanted to know what the law would give me if I ever walked away. I wanted leverage, and I got it. I found out that because of the affair, I could claim infidelity and walk away with almost everything. But I didn't file. Instead, I used that knowledge to rewrite the balance of power in our home. I started handling all finances. Told her it was to simplify things. She agreed eagerly, still desperate to fix us. I took over our accounts, our mortgage, even her retirement investments. I became the gatekeeper of her stability. Then I began rewriting our social image. I started posting photos of us online, smiling, laughing, traveling. People commented things like, "You two are such a perfect couple, and after all these years, still in love." Sarah would tear up reading those comments. I'd look at her and say softly, "They believe in us more than I do." Each word landed like a knife. But the real revenge wasn't financial or social. It was emotional. I wanted her to feel the slow death of trust, just like I had. So I started disappearing. Not for long, just enough to make her wonder. I'd leave for late meetings, drinks with coworkers, short business trips. Sometimes I'd come home and smell like someone else's perfume, not because I cheated, but because I wanted her to imagine it. And she did. She'd ask, "Who were you with?" I'd smile and say, "You don't get to ask that anymore." The look in her eyes, that flicker of realization that she'd lost control, and that was the first real satisfaction I'd felt in months. Eventually, she broke. One night, she fell to her knees in front of me, crying uncontrollably. "I can't live like this anymore," she said. "Tell me what to do. I'll do anything to fix it." I looked down at her, this woman who once betrayed me without hesitation, now reduced to a trembling confession of regret. And in that moment, I realized something dark. I didn't want to fix it. I didn't even want her love anymore. I wanted her to feel powerless, to understand what she took from me. So I said, "You can't fix it, but you can live with it." From that night on, the house became silent again. But it wasn't the peaceful silence of before. It was heavy, suffocating. She walked on eggshells, afraid of what I might say or do next. I didn't yell, didn't hit, didn't curse. I didn't need to. My silence did all the work. Months passed. Slowly, she began to fade, emotionally, mentally. Her laughter disappeared, her energy drained. She started therapy, but even that didn't help much. She once told me, "I feel like I'm a ghost in my own home." I didn't tell her the truth. That's exactly what I wanted. But life has a cruel sense of irony. Around the 1-year mark of her confession, she fell sick. Nothing serious at first, just fatigue, headaches. But the stress had worn her down. When she was hospitalized briefly for exhaustion, I sat beside her, watching her sleep. She looked peaceful, almost childlike. For a fleeting moment, I felt pity. I thought about all our years together, the good ones before the lies. I thought about our first apartment, our first road trip, the night we adopted our dog. I almost reached for her hand. Almost. But then I remembered the messages. The nights she whispered another man's name. The way she told me I didn't love him, but I let him use me, and I withdrew my hand. When she woke up, I told her calmly that I'd made a decision. "I'm leaving," I said. She blinked, stunned. "What? No! You said we were getting better?" I smiled faintly. "That was part of your healing, not mine." She started sobbing, begging, clinging to me. But it didn't move me. I packed my bag that night and walked out of the house we'd built together. The next few weeks were oddly quiet. Freedom felt strange at first, not joyful but heavy. I'd spent so long plotting revenge that I'd forgotten what peace even felt like. I found a small apartment across town, started running again, picked up photography and things I hadn't done in years. And then one day I received a message from Sarah. It was short. "You were right. The internet doesn't forget. Neither does the heart." Attached was a photo, the same one of us I'd once posted, smiling in front of a sunset. She had cropped herself out, leaving only me. That was the last message she ever sent. I didn't reply. I later heard through a mutual friend that she'd moved away. Changed her job, started therapy again, tried to rebuild her life. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. I didn't care enough to find out. I'd already gotten what I wanted. She would live with her guilt. I would live with my peace. And the world, the quiet, cruel, beautiful world, would go on.